40 to 50% of the world population are hesitant about the new mRNA COVID vaccine. So what should you do? How should one decide? We believe it's our channel's obligation to bring the main COVID vaccine debate to our community's attention. Let the experts speak, and then let our community decide. SARS-CoV-2 vaccine debate. Is the world at risk? A few weeks ago, Dr. Gerrit van den Bosch of Belgium ignited a worldwide SARS-CoV-2 vaccine debate over the issue of vaccine long-term safety, even suggesting that the vaccines would unleash, quote, a global catastrophe without equal, end of quote. Now, the scientific think tank, McGill OSS, immediately responded and fact-checked van den Bosch. But who's correct? And do we need to be worried? That's what we're talking about today, and we're starting right now. And in fact, we believe we have a means to prove or disprove that van den Bosch is correct or not correct, and we'll present that by the end of the video. Now first, this van den Bosch isn't some random anti-vaxxer or simply a YouTuber. He is a world-renowned vaccine and viral expert, having worked for the likes of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and he was their senior project officer for vaccine discovery, and for numerous other international vaccine research firms. He is pro-vaccine and not anti-vaccine at all. He just isn't in favor of this vaccine at this time, and he's an expert. In March, he sent a letter to the World Health Organization urging them to open a scientific hearing, open both to the public and scientists, to discuss whether the world's current mass immunization efforts are a, quote, colossal blunder, end of quote. And when a man of this caliber says the current COVID vaccines are potentially dangerous, the world should at least listen. Everyone doesn't agree, but the world should listen and debate this point. Well, at least those who have heard about this issue should be listening. Worldwide media is mostly silent, and van den Bosch has been censored by leading social media firms. Not surprising. And of course, the WHO has not responded. Also, not surprising. However, the scientific think tank McGill OSS did respond, and their opinion piece by writer Jonathan Jarry is the #1 Google result when you search for information on van den Bosch. So since the survival of the human race could be at stake depending on who is correct, we thought we would take a critical look at this discussion for our community. Who is correct has an incredible influence on how prophecy plays out in the upcoming years. We'll present this as a debate, put out questions, see how both camps responded to them, and then give our opinions. Now for the first question. Does the current mass vaccination effort carry the potential of causing the emergence of new and stronger variant strains? Dr. van den Bosch makes this analogy that just like bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics, viruses can become resistant to the antibodies produced after a vaccine injection. In each case, the antibodies or antibiotics are designed to kill the pathogen, but when they don't kill them all, the surviving ones are stronger than the ones that were killed. The pathogen adapts and learns how to defeat the antibiotic or the vaccine antibodies. In the case of viruses, it is the variants that the vaccine antibodies don't kill that might live to fight another day. The current vaccine that is being used is very, very good at selectively neutralizing or killing the wild strain of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that we've had from the start of the pandemic. It is what the vaccine was designed to do. However, there is so much virus out there that even though the mutations necessary to form a variant that may be something like 1 in a million can easily happen when there are 100 million infected persons. So, in a matter of weeks, as we've seen, the variants become the dominant versions wherever they are. And that is what we are seeing all over the inoculated world. And this is why in hospitals, first-year infectious disease residents learn that you never begin a vaccination program in the middle of an epidemic or pandemic. More on that very interesting point later. Vanden Bossche isn't the only one saying this. Here is a quote from Paul Benarraz, PhD from Howard Hughes Medical Center, New York. Rolling out a particularly effective vaccine regime in the peak of a highly prevalent viral epidemic is just not a great idea. There is a chance that people waiting for the second dose may have a suboptimal level of immunity that places selective pressure on the virus. If someone were to become infected during the interval between jabs, that pressure would allow the emergence of a mutant version of SARS-CoV-2 able to shake off a person's immune response, a so-called escape variant. Any such variant that also proved capable of causing severe disease could potentially spark a whole new, devastating wave of infections and deaths. So this is Vanden Bossche's first argument, that we are setting ourselves up to produce many new virulent variant forms of the virus that the vaccine just can't neutralize. Not one, not two, but many. Now, McGill OSS answers this objection, and it doesn't call it complete nonsense, but says it is not a worry. They quote Dr. Paul Offit, a pediatrician specialized in vaccines and immunology and the co-inventor of the rotavirus vaccine. Dr. Offit says the vaccine is strong enough to completely kill all viruses that enter the body, so there is no chance for mutations. But notice, he doesn't say this vaccine is that strong. McGill OSS also points out that the Brazilian and South African mutations arose before we started giving vaccines, that those mutations are going to arise anyway, and that if they do, we simply create new booster shot vaccines. Similarly, if a new SARS-CoV-2 variant emerges and is so different that our current crop of vaccines don't match it, scientists can simply tweak their vaccines. It is not an instantaneous solution, as massive vaccination campaigns require manufacturing and development at a scale, but it's a fix we know well and have implemented in the past, they said. So what is our opinion of question 1? Well, we aren't experts, but we do know that the current vaccine is highly specific. It neutralizes the wild strain, but because of that specificity, which is a specificity that no other vaccine in history has had, it doesn't neutralize other strains quite as well. It seems to be a one-trick pony. It is already known not to neutralize the South African variant, and maybe it won't neutralize the others. So essentially, if nothing else, we are probably selectively breeding the South African strain, and it will grow faster the more people receive shots. If only the variant lives to spread to others, it will soon be the predominant strain out there. Now, personally, we also do not believe it is as easy as McGill OSS says to continually give new vaccine after new vaccine to the entire world. It is also unknown what other effect dozens of different mRNA vaccine injections will have on the human body. Vanden Bossche suggests it may result in autoimmune diseases or even leukemia. What happens if there are hundreds of variants and we can't keep up? We believe the risk of creating new vaccine variants may be very real. One, we may not be able to control. So we believe a debate is called for this question. Now, the second question is, can current mRNA vaccines weaken the human response to the variants? In other words, might the mRNA vaccine not only encourage variants, but make those who take the vaccine more susceptible to severe disease should they be exposed to the variant? This is Vanden Bossche's main point. It takes a little bit to explain, but it is so important. Please take the next 2 minutes to listen to this, as millions or billions of lives could be at stake in the answer. What most non-medical viewers don't know is the body has two forms of antibodies, nonspecific and specific. Specific antibodies are formed in response when you get exposed to a virus or vaccine. The body sees the virus and makes a specific antibody to kill just that virus. And they are highly powerful. In the case of the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, we have already seen that it produces highly specific antibodies to the spike protein of the wild strain, the first version of the virus, and it neutralizes the virus in 90% of the cases. Pretty good. But when you are never exposed to a pathogen before, your body didn't have a chance to create these stronger specific antibodies. But usually, the nonspecific are strong enough to defeat the pathogen before it takes a foothold in your body. Ever wonder why children have been mostly immune to COVID? Van den Bosch's answer is they have a more robust nonspecific antibodies in their system. But as we age, we lose some of the effectiveness of this system. However, despite the weakened system, it has been estimated that, like 85% of all SARS-CoV-2 infections are asymptomatic. If this is true, it's because of these non-specific antibodies in our bodies that neutralize the pathogen before it gets a chance to make us sick. So non-specific antibodies are very important. They're our first line of defense against something new. Now here's where it gets interesting. Van den Bosch theorizes that if a vaccinated person is attacked by a variant form, the body immediately is going to form the specific antibodies that the vaccine programmed the body to make. And because these specific antibodies are stronger than the non-specific antibodies, like a bully on the playground, they push the non-specific antibodies out of the way. The problem, however, is the specific antibodies likely won't work on the variants. And since that person's non-specific antibodies are already pushed out of the way, they can't help either. So the person is left with nothing. And 85% of people who would have beaten the infection without the vaccine no longer can. And vast numbers will become sick with the variant virus. If Van den Bosch is correct, and we don't know that he is, it is a nightmare. And again, Van den Bosch isn't the only one saying this. In an important but ignored article in Nature from only back in March 26th of 2021, we read, "Our results indicate that SARS-CoV-2 variants may increase the risk of infection in immunized individuals." That's exactly what Van den Bosch has been saying. Now, in the debate, McGill OSX actually sidesteps this most important issue entirely, which is a huge weakness in their rebuttal of Van den Bosch. And instead, they focus on the issue of whether lockdowns and other such methods are useful or harmful. Quote, "This innate immunity gambit on the part of Dr. Bosch is something typically seen in wellness communities obsessed with the naturalistic fallacy, where strengthening your immune system is as simple and as natural as taking in sun, walking in the woods, and hugging people." McGill OSS, that wasn't the question. You didn't answer the right question. So our opinion is that we don't know the answer to this question yet, and in fact, no one knows. What we are seeing occurring in the nations today is a giant experiment. The vaccines may work, and they might make things worse. But Dr. Van den Bosch's theory is logical and entirely possible and shouldn't just be ignored. We need to look at the evidence before deciding one way or the other, but how do we get that evidence? Fisherman is a member of our advisory board, many of you know him, and is a licensed physician. Here is what he said to our other board members on this topic. Quote, "We have this discussion at work on a daily basis with the colleagues in my group," and he means the other doctors. "Some have been vaccinated, some haven't. The reality is that the long-term effects of the vaccines are not yet known. I watch the Israeli media closely. Israel has vaccinated a higher percentage of its population than practically anyone else. And since people travel from all over the world to Israel, they have reported all the major variants. As of yet, there are no widespread reports of ADE, and he means antibody-dependent enhancement, which is kind of what we've been talking about. That's Van den Bosch's theory. The incidence of COVID and death rates have plummeted in Israel. So it is apparent that in the short run, the vaccines are effective. But it is still unknown about the long-term side effects. I do not discount the possibility of widespread suffering and death as a result of the long-term effects. End of quote. Now, I think Fisherman's approach is very, very logical. In fact, it's the most logical approach I've seen yet. And Fisherman is right on the nose about where we should look, to Israel. And the death rate is the statistic we should watch. I do know that rates of infection for the South African variant are higher in vaccinated Israelis than in the non-vaccinated. However, we haven't seen a death rate increase yet. And that's what really makes a difference. What really matters is serious illness, not just being infected. Mild infections, aren't as much of a problem. That's why we have to watch the death rates. I think we will know by fall. If vaccinated persons are dying faster than unvaccinated, then we know Van Bosch was correct. If not, he is mistaken. So, our final question is, what should we do in the meantime as we wait for those kind of statistics? Van den Bosch suggests a worldwide conference with all the top experts to discuss this issue. And we believe he is exactly correct. What is the harm in scientists discussing this issue? Well, the possible, quote, harm is that once word gets out about these issues, it's likely to both freak out the world population and all but end the vaccine rollout until the issue is resolved. In our opinion, however, people have a right to know, and that's why we are recommending a worldwide discussion of experts. But we doubt it's going to happen. We live in a censor culture, and they don't want the rollout to stop. McGill OSS had this to say: imagine you were a public health advisor and were confronted with this choice: to heed Dr. Bosch's apocalyptic warning and stop all COVID-19 vaccinations. They call that scenario 1. Or to ignore him and follow the evidence. Scenario 2. What would you do? Again, McGill OSS misses the point. Van den Bosch is recommending a discussion, which is something they don't even address. And second, there is no evidence as yet to follow. As we said, we don't expect that evidence to happen until fall. The variants are too new. It is the #1 search result, so many are only getting their information from them. We find that tragic. So what do we suggest? Well, I am personally delaying any vaccine for the moment because there isn't any definitive evidence. In the meantime, there is a third choice that McGill doesn't mention at all. My physician prescribed me the drug ivermectin with known antiviral qualities to take as a preventive against both the wild type and the variants until we know more about the vaccines. If you're interested in trying this same third approach, speak to your own physician. But a lingering question is, if it is common knowledge among vaccine specialists that nations shouldn't start a vaccine rollout in the middle of a pandemic, in fact, if it's something that first-year infectious disease specialists learn, why was this done? And why wasn't this issue discussed or even mentioned in the media? Also, why was such a specific vaccine chosen as opposed to a more general one that would kill the variants as well? These are the kind of questions that need to be answered, for which I have never heard a single word.